Okay, so now we're recording again.
Okay.
Let me ask you a question. How did you learn how to work on cars?
Well, I picked it up from my dad. He'd done it all my life.
Mm-hmm.
I watched him, and I didn't know much else what to do, and so I started doing that.
So you were doing it at his salvage in a back room. When did you first open up your own business, and where was it?
You know, in the midst of all this National Guard stuff, I think I don't know how this worked out because it seems like it overlaps, but I know that this part's true, and I'm pretty sure the last part was true, but so they must have overlapped. But in late 1964, I rented that shop across from the tire store where the pottery place is now, 5760 North Broadway, and I think they're about to tear that building down. I heard somebody bought it and they're probably going to tear it down. But I bought that building, and it was on leased ground, and I couldn't buy the ground. But I felt like I was kind of using my dad up, and I felt like I needed to get out on my own. I was 20 years old, and it was late 64. And I rented that building, I think it was in middle of December 1964. And I must have still been on Air Force training. But I started that business, and I bought a car or two, and I bought that building for $3,000 and the 99-year lease on the ground, and I think it was a couple $100 a year or something like that on the ground. And that was pretty cheap stuff, but everything was cheap back then, and you didn't make much money either. But I started buying a couple cars, and I remember I parked a car out front for sale right after I bought that building. I think I had fixed it down to salvage, but I moved into that building and I had a car ready to sell. It was it was a pretty new car. And I think it was a 64 Impala SS. And I put it out front. That might not have been that car, but that was one of the first cars that I had. Anyway, I put a car out front for sale there, and Charlotte called me at lunchtime. She was working at a shoe store downtown. She wanted to know how things were going. I said, not very good. I haven't sold that car yet. I'd only been there about 4 hours, and I thought that car ought to have been gone. I think she was a little smarter than I was. But I was awful anxious, and I had the heart, and I was going to give her hell. And I did. I gave her hell. But I gave the business hell. I worked my ass off. And I was buying a car, and it wouldn't sell very fast, and I didn't make much money. And in early 65, I was still 20 years old, and I decided to get legal. This was in January or February. I hadn't been there very long, but I wasn't really legal. I didn't have a sales tax number. I didn't have a dealer's license. And you didn't need as much back then as you do now to be legal. But I had to have a sales tax number, and I had to have a dealer's number and a dealer's plate. And I wasn't old enough because I wasn't 21, and they wouldn't let me have a sales tax number. And my dad had a sales tax number for his business, but that he couldn't help me because he already had one. So Uncle Clifford signed for me to get a sales tax number when I was 20 years old. And I was operating on a shoestring for a long time. And that was before I bought that house. But that's how I made a little bit of money and bought that house, because I was in business in early 1965, and I bought that house on a commitment in early 1965, And then I paid for it before we got married in August of 65. But I know I wasn't doing very good. I was barely making it. We got married. I come home from honeymoon. I think we were gone 10 days or 14 days. And I was trying to sell a car or two. And gradually I built up my inventory. But then Mark come along a few months later, and he was born. And we didn't have any money. Our house payment was only $85 or $87 a month, but that was quite a bit of money back then. That included taxes and insurance. 85, 87, can you believe that? $85 or $87 a month. Taxes and insurance included. But then you had utilities, and you had to buy groceries, and you had to buy insurance on your business, and you had to pay utilities at the business. And anyway, I struggled and struggled and struggled, but and we operated on a shoestring for a long time. And I was getting a little bit bigger and handling a little bit more, and I had a buddy working for me pretty cheap, and he wasn't very reliable, and he didn't show up on time, and some days he didn't show up at all, and I couldn't afford any better than that, so I had to put up with it. And then I had to buy groceries and feed Charlie and I and Mark, and I got in a rut, and I was buying damaged cars, and back then they didn't have salvage titles, and I'd go to the bank and I'd buy a wreck for $500 or $600, and I'd borrow $1,600 or $1,800 on it, whatever it was worth when it's done, and then we had a little grocery money because I overbought on that car. I was in upside down on that car, but then I got about 5 of them cars, and I owed what they were worth done, and they were still wrecked, and I didn't have any money to buy parts. I was really struggling. And then in 1968, I think it was late, maybe it was 69. I can't remember exactly. That article I found in the paper will tell us. We got activated over the Pueblo. I think it was 68. You were born in 66, and Mom was pregnant with Donna in 68, right? Because Mom was pregnant with Donna, so it was 68. I think it was January. The North Koreans seized the ship, the Pueblo. And there was, I think, 1,000 men on board, and they held them hostage. And President Johnson, right? Wasn't it President Johnson then?
Maybe.
Activated the Air National Guard. And we were told to report to the McConnell Air Force Base that night. We didn't know what the hell was going on. We didn't know where we was going to be 24 hours later. And I didn't have any money, and my family didn't have any money, and we were upside down in them cars, and I didn't know where I was going to be in 24 hours, and I went to the base, and us guys were scratching our head and worried. We don't know what the hell was going on. We didn't know if he was going to go to war with North Korea or what. Anyway, the federal government don't act too fast sometimes, and we met out there for 6 months. And, of course, those guys went to the flight line and the fire department, and I wound up in the kitchen fixing dinner and cooking and learning how to do that. And I had a couple buddies that were showing me the ropes. Bill Simmons was one of them. He was an old timer, and he took me under his wing and showed me how to do a lot of things, and we were friends until he died a few years ago. But we spent 6 months out there not knowing what the hell was coming at us. 6 months after we were activated, most of the unit was ordered to South Korea. There was a few of us guys that were scattered all over the United States, different bases, and some of them even out of the country in different bases. But most of the unit went to South Korea. I don't know how this happened, but I was working out the base for them 6 months, and I'm making a little bit of money, not very much. I don't remember what we were paid, but I think it was around $100 a month, give or take. but that was a little more money than it is now. And after 6 months, they sent most of the unit to Korea and divvied the rest of us out to different bases. And for some reason, I was stationed at McConnell, of all places. Well, I was able to work out there full-time for the Air Force, and then I worked up at the shop another full-time. I had 2 full-time jobs. Charlotte and I didn't go out to eat or to a dinner for a year and a half. She had Donna while I was activated, and I was able to kind of get my finances in order with the help of the military paycheck and busting my ass after hours at the shop. And then I kind of got my finances straightened out a little bit. I didn't have to file bankruptcy. Everybody got their money on time, but boy, it could have sure went wrong the other way. And when a year and a half was up, we was in a little better shape financially. And then I started buying some cars, and by then I had a little more experience, and I was making a little bit better money. I wasn't getting rich, but I was doing a little bit better. And then in 1971, I bought that 3.5 acres or whatever it is where the tire store is now. But at that time there was a 2-story house on the corner and a detached garage that had been converted into living quarters. And I built a shop back kind of behind the 2-story house, and I rented the house out, and the little converted garage, I rented it out. And I had built that shop for $8,000, which was a lot of money. I barely got it going. I had to borrow the money from the bank to do that, I think. And I was making payments on the land and the shop, but of course the rent was helping me. And we rebuilt quite a few cars there for a few years. And then the energy crisis come along in mid to late 70s. And I had some real nice Buicks and Oldsmobiles and a pickup or two, and gasoline, you couldn't hardly get it. And everybody wanted a little bitty economy car like a Pinto or a Volkswagen. We didn't have very many imports back then other than Volkswagen. And you couldn't hardly buy a Pinto or a Volkswagen back in the mid-70s because everybody was buying them. And it was hard to buy them, and it was damn hard to make any money on them. And you couldn't, I remember when Winnebago got in a lot of trouble, and I don't know whether they filed bankruptcy or not. They're still in business today, I think, but and I'm not sure about that, but there was a lot of the motorhome manufacturers that were in bad shape because people couldn't afford them. And they couldn't sell a nice Cadillac or Buick or Oldsmobile because they weren't economy cars. And I had a hell of a time making it. And one day I said to John Nelson, who worked for me, and before he came to work for me, he's 2 or 3 years older than I was. He was in the Air National Guard with me. And then he came to work for me after we were deactivated. But he was a little more mature than I was and had a little more experience because he had that service station in Sedgwick. And he used to sell tires. And I had a little bit of tire business experience because I was buying tires for them used cars, and I knew how to change tires. And I said something to him someday. I said, you know, I don't know how we can make it with the economy like it is and the energy crisis like it is. I'm wondering if we could get in the tire business and use this building for tire business. And a couple months went by, and I kind of had that on the back burner, but I didn't know how to approach it. And a couple months went by, and he says, Alan, I thought you said something about getting in the tire business. So I said, yeah, I don't quite know how to do it. And then I got to thinking, and I had to go to Kansas City with my wrecker, and I went up there to pick up a car that I bought. And while I was there, I got the phone book out, and I looked in the tire pages, wholesale or whatever, and I called the B.F. Goodrich Distribution Center, and this man answered the phone, and I told him I was thinking about getting in the tire business, and he said, where are you? And I told him where I was, and he says, I'm coming down that way in a week or so. I'll look you up, and we'll see what we can do. and his name was Virgil Meinholt, and he was 2 or 3 years older than I was. Well, he come down, he drove in our little old grass driveway and dirt driveway, and I know he was shaking his head. He told me later, he said he just didn't know about us. But he sold me 200 tires. And before they got there, John and I built some racks in the pole barn, and we had a place to put the tires when 200 tires come in. Seemed like I had tires to last me the rest of my life if I didn't sell them. I was scared. I was really worried. But we started selling tires to friends and family, and we was treating them real good, but we was making a little bit of money. And then we got to where we could put an ad in the paper, and we started selling a few tires to strangers and off of our ads in the paper. And then we got in the phone book, and business grew and business grew and business grew, and pretty soon the cars were a sideline and tires were our bread and butter. And we got to doing pretty good in the tire business, and I built a big building. I moved that 2-story house out. I sold it, and they moved it out, and we knocked the basement walls in, filled the hole in where the basement was, and we built a 50 by 80 metal steel building, prefab building, real nice building. We started selling more tires. I worked day and night putting offices in there, building the offices with lumber that I could scrounge up wherever. And it wasn't real fancy, but it worked. And it looks pretty good to this day. Later on, we had the quarry tile put in there, and it turned out pretty good. We didn't have an air conditioner for several years, and the customers were sweating. One year we decided we better put an air conditioner in there because we was losing business. We'd cut a hole in the wall, put a window unit in the north wall of the showroom, and we just kept getting a little bit bigger and a little bit bigger. And one year we were able to pave the front parking lot because it had been gravel for many years. But then we added on to the building, and then we sold the business to Burroughs Tire because he come to town and started advertising real big and selling tires cheaper than we could. And he told me he could buy us out. He had a bunch of tire stores in Las Vegas and that vicinity. He had 26. No, I think he had 6 stores back there, I think. And he sold them for like $6 million or something like that. And then he moved to Oklahoma and Kansas, and he was going to be the big tire dealer in those 2 states. And he was. He had 26 stores in Oklahoma and Kansas during the height of his thing. But he wound up going broke 3 years after I sold him our tire store and our business, and I got him back. And then we made some money again. While I was sold out to Burl, I bought the corner north of us and put in a 4-bay car wash and built a shop, and I was back in the car business. 3 years later, I was back in the car business and the tire business. They've been pretty good to us. Over the years, we built some commercial buildings and leased them out, and Charlie and I managed to get everything paid for eventually, and now we got a positive net worth, and we're pretty secure, and now it's time to slow down. I don't know what to tell you next.
Well, there's this Catholic priest you get along with that also has an interest in cars.
Yeah.
You want to talk about him?
Back in about 1994, and this is 2012, December. Back in about 1994, I was going to some Catholic seminars and stuff, and somebody told me that there was a Catholic priest at Holy Savior Parish that was accepting donated cars, and he'd fix them up and he would sell them. And it was a very poor parish, primarily a black Catholic parish, and they had a Catholic school there, and there were a lot of black students and a lot of non-Catholic students, but there was a lot of the black people wanted their kids to get a good education. Even though they weren't Catholic, they sent them to this Catholic school. And Father was able to convert some of those non-Catholics into Catholics, and he built up a pretty nice parish there, although it was a poor parish. But the way he kept it going was he put an ad in the Catholic Advance, and there was a lot of word of mouth around Wichita that he would accept donated cars. If somebody had an old car or wanted a newer car, they would donate sometimes their old car to him, or sometimes a pretty nice car he got donated, a pretty nice Suburban worth $8,000 or $10,000. I remember that happened a time or two. Anyway, some of these cars needed work. Sometimes I had some parts in my parts yard, and I would give him some parts and motors and alternators and starters, and I didn't, a lot of times didn't have time to install them, but I'd help him with the parts. And then I knew a couple of mechanics who'd help him with the installation, and we helped Father turn some of them cars around, turn them into money, and keep that church and school going. He was a pastor there till 4 or 5 years ago. In the process of his being pastor there, in the time period that he was pastor there, he found out I had a snowplow. Guess what? I got to plow the church parking lot and the school parking lot every time it snowed. I took pretty good care of him. He took good care of me. We were buddies. We went to lunch a lot. We're still good friends to this day. He retired from being pastor there about 4 or 5 years ago. We're still friends. He's a chaplain at the Veterans Hospital. I sold him a Chevy Impala 3 years ago. It had 6,000 miles on it. Last time I talked to him, I think it had almost 80,000 miles on it. He's tickled to death with that car. He's looking for another one. He's talking to me about another one. I, of course, treat him good. He treats me good. We're buddies, and it's pretty neat to have a Catholic priest for your buddy. When he retired from being pastor at Holy Savior, I knew that St. Jude was losing the fellow that did the snow plowing at St. Jude. I knew I couldn't do both of them. I volunteered to do St. Jude's snow plowing, and last year it didn't even snow, but I've done quite a bit of snow plowing at St. Jude since I left St. Holy Savior, and I'm sure I'll have to do some this year because it looks like we're going to get some snow. But I push a lot of snow at St. Jude, and I do it for nothing, and people thank me, Father thanks me, and they kind of praise me in the bulletin once in a while, and I don't need any of that, but it's nice to have it, and I feel like I'm doing my part there. And Father Pat and I still go to lunch once in a while. He calls me on the phone. We visit quite a bit. We've had some real nice conversations about the world and religion and everything, cars even. But he's just a good buddy. We're still good buddies.
Now I'm going to ask a couple random questions. Do you remember where you were when you first heard that President John F. Kennedy was shot?
I was in college at St. Gregory's, and that was in 1963, November, right? So I'm pretty sure I had my El Camino down there at that time. We had Marvin's 55 Chevy down there before that, but I think in 63 we drove my El Camino. And Sonic drive-in restaurants originated in Shawnee, Oklahoma. That was where their first drive-in Sonic restaurant was. And it was on the other side of town from where St. Gregory's was. But I believe it was Marvin and I and Michael Mason. He was our friend. We got in the El Camino and we drove to the Sonic restaurant, and we had the radio on. We knew that President Kennedy had been shot. I believe it was that morning, and it was a couple hours later, but we were at the Sonic restaurant talking about that. But I'll never forget where we were talking about that afternoon.
Do you remember where you were when you first heard that President Reagan had been shot?
No, I don't. I sure don't.
Sonic started in Oklahoma, and Pizza Hut started where?
Pizza Hut started in Wichita, Kansas, and it's funny that you would mention that because when I went to Capon, one of my classmates was Dennis Carney. His two older brothers, Dan and Frank, started Pizza Hut with, I think they said $500 that they borrowed from their mother. And they started it on North Bluff in a little brick building. It started in Wichita. When Charla and I were dating, we went to a Pizza Hut on Douglas, not too far from where she lived on Exposition Street. And I think that was a number 2 Pizza Hut, maybe it's a number 3. Now I don't know how many Pizza Huts there are worldwide, but they're big. Of course, they sold out to PepsiCo 20, 25 years ago. I'm guessing on that. But Frank Carney was one of the brothers that started Pizza Hut. And you know what? It's funny that you mentioned that because when I joined the Air National Guard and I got assigned to McConnell Air Force Base, guess who my officer in charge was? Frank Carney. Right out of McConnell. And when we went to summer camp in Wisconsin, Frank Carney went with us. And guess what we had for dinner one night? Pizzas. He had us all making pizzas for everybody at summer camp. But it was a great big old sheet pan. It wasn't a round pizza like you buy, but we had some pretty good pizza at summer camp. Frank Carney is still alive. He's a little bit older than I am, and so is his brother Dan. Dan Carney's a friend of Father Pat's. And Father Pat bought or moved to an apartment over on Central, just east of where Capon used to be. And he invited us to his open house 4 or 5 years ago when right before he left Holy Savior. And I saw Dan Carney at Father Pat's open house because they're buddies. When I went to my reunion, I saw Dennis Carney at my reunion, and I asked him how Dan was doing. And he said Dan was slipping. He had Alzheimer's real bad. And I got the impression that Dan didn't even know where he was. But Dan Carney invested in quite a few businesses after he sold out to Pizza Hut or to PepsiCo. And I don't know, do you have Papa John's restaurants in California? Dan Carney helped Papa John's spread and get big. And Dan Carney was on a lot of Papa John's commercials. And I haven't seen him for quite a while, probably due to his Alzheimer's. But I hope he's all right.
Your name is Alan Paul Cross, and you're a junior. Can you talk about your knowledge of the history of the names Alan and Paul in the Cross family?
Well, probably not as well as you can because you've been doing a lot more research than I have. But I'll tell you what I know for a fact. I'm Alan Paul Cross Jr. Of course, my father is Alan Paul Cross, and I guess we call him Senior. He's deceased now, but I was very glad to have his name. I'm very proud of my father. I always have been. And his dad's name was Paul Leon Cross, Paul L. Cross. That was my grandfather. And his dad's name was Alan B. What was the B for?
Browning.
Alan Brownie Cross. We saw his grave yesterday when we went to Sylvan Grove. And you know the history, back further than that, better than I do. But I can tell you that much, And of course, your name's Mark Allen Cross. And I didn't know if you would appreciate having the Roman numeral 3 after your name, so your mother and I decided to name you Mark Allen Cross. But there are some other Mark Allens in there. There was a Mark Allen that was pretty heavy in luggage, wasn't there, or something? years ago.
There's Mark Cross Leather Goods.
Yeah, yeah.
And there's
Wasn't Mark Allen, it was Mark Cross.
it was just Mark Cross.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's another Mark Cross somewhere, I think, too. Or maybe it's the same. And then there's Mark Cross, the actor and teacher in Hollywood. That's you.
It's me. Yeah.
Yeah. Mark Allen Cross.
What would you say would be the positive traits that you inherited from your father?
My father was a good man, and he treated everybody with respect and dignity and honesty. And I'm not saying that I learned it from him, but I learned some of it from him. I still got some learning to do, but he set a very good example, and I'm glad some of him rubbed off on me. I wish more would have. He was a good man. He was an honest man. He was a hard worker. And he had a lot of people at his funeral. And I got friends that have told me they still miss him, that were his friends and my friends. And of course he's been gone for 14 years now, 15 almost. But I miss him every day. He set a very good example for me. He laid down a roadmap for me to follow, and I haven't followed it as well as I should have. He was a good man, and so was his dad. And you know what? I took business ethics in college, but I think I learned more from my dad than I did from that book. He knew how to be fair with people. And you know, you can make $1 million or $2 million or $3 million or whatever, but when you die, you don't get to take it with you. And I don't know why some of these people can't get that through their thick heads. They're greedy till the day they die, some of these people. I don't understand it.
What positive traits do you think you inherited from your mother?
A lot of the same things. She was very good to people. She was very thrifty. She was a coupon clipper. She watched how she spent her money. When I was young, we were very poor. We didn't have a lot of money. We didn't live very high on the hog. We didn't live high on the hog at all. Mom was very thrifty. I remember when she did laundry when I was real young in the wintertime, we'd run water out of the front of Dad's shop, out on the slab in front of Dad's shop, and we'd fill the wringer washing machine with water and soap. I think we heated water on the stove. There was a gas stove in the shop. We put a bucket of water on top of the gas stove, and that's how we got hot water for the washing of the clothes. And then we had two rinse tubs, as I recall. I remember my mother washing clothes when it was snowing in that driveway in front of, and that approach in front of that shop out in the cold. And she would run that wringer washing machine, wring them clothes out, and hang them clothes on the clothesline behind the house, and they would freeze dry. And if she went out there before they were dry, there was icicles hanging from them. So she'd leave them a little bit longer. And she'd bring them in the house sometimes so they'd thaw out, and then she'd take them back out a little bit more after it warmed up a little more and let them dry some more. And then she had an ironing board. But I remember she had a scrub board too, you know what I'm saying? And she was a hard worker. I mean, it was tough. And we didn't have a trash man. Whenever Mom opened a can of beans, she'd rinse a can out and pour it in with the beans, the rinse water out of the can, and then she would open the other end of the can, put the lids inside the can and step on it till it was flat, and we saved a lot of room in the 55-gallon barrel. And every once in a while Dad would haul 2 or 3 barrels of trash to the dump, because we didn't have a trash man back then. I don't know if anybody did. Everybody burnt their trash, you know, and it was just tough. We grew up on day old bread, day old donuts. You know, we had a mulberry tree across the road from our house. She canned a lot of stuff out of the garden. We had a garden. Us kids had to go hoe the weeds out of the garden when we were growing up. She canned a lot of things so we'd have food in the wintertime. My mother knew how to stretch a dollar about as far as anybody I've ever known. And she was very religious. She went to Mass regular. She prayed. My grandmother, Vessels, would come to see us. I remember Grandma Vessels used to lay in bed every night praying the rosary. I remember that. We had a 2-room house when I was a kid, and 4 of us kids in 1 bedroom, and it wasn't very big. We carpooled to St. Pat's grade school with some of the neighbors. We'd give them a little bit of money for gas. Mom, they took us most of the time. I think Mom just gave them a couple bucks for gas every week, you know, for half a tank of gas or whatever. Dad was gone a lot, trying to make a living for us, for his family. And they were just hard-working folks. Mom started giving blood, donating blood. I don't know when she started, pretty young, but when she died, she was a top blood donor in a several county area, and maybe in the whole state of Kansas. And I got an article to shop on the wall where she had donor buttons on some kind of a thing she hung on the wall. And she had blood donor buttons, and you wouldn't believe how many there were. And in that article in the newspaper, I think it said she donated like 49 or 51 gallons of blood during her lifetime that they knew of. That's, you know, a 55-gallon barrel's pretty big. She damn near filled it. She was a good person. We lived on Goodwill. We grew up on hand-me-down clothes. She knew how to stretch a dollar. We went to the Salvation Army. She went to the Salvation Army and bought us kids clothes. Later on, we got a little bit better stuff. But I remember when I was a kid, she bought used jeans at the Salvation Army, and the knees were kind of white because somebody wore them and they were kneeling a lot. She took a blue Crayola and colored those jeans where they weren't quite blue and ironed that color in with her iron. She did a lot of things like that to make us look a little better. She was a hard-working gal. I'm proud she was my mother.
Did you do any traveling with your parents later in life, after you were married?
After I was married?
Yeah.
Not very much. We went to Sylvan a couple times together.
Yeah.
One time, before we were married, and when my dad moved back here to Kansas, he wanted to move my wife and us kids back to Kansas after Don was killed. He thought we ought to be closer to his folks. They were having a hard time with his death. Mom didn't want to move back here because her family was in California. Dad promised Mom that he would take her back to her family once a year. He kept his word. I remember going back to California at least once a year. Sometimes we went in the summertime, and then sometimes we went again at Christmas. Quite a bit of the time we went twice a year. So when Dad promised Mom that he would take her back to her family once a year, he kept his promise. Now, we went to Colorado in 2 vans. I had a van, Dad had a van when Doug got married years ago. And we went on a few little trips like that together, but we took 2 vehicles because there was so many of us. We went to Sylvan a couple times together after I was married, you know, Memorial Day and such as that. And then when I was in the tire business, I went on a lot of trips overseas and all over the United States. Compliments of B.F. Goodrich, a lot of them, and KFDI Radio, and sometimes Eldorado Tire, sometimes Cooper Tire. You know, I went on a lot of incentive trips that I earned buying tires and stuff, advertising. I got to see a lot of the world on those incentive trips, and they treated us like royalty, B.F. Goodrich especially, because sometimes we had to buy $300,000 worth of tires in a 10-month period to go on this incentive trip. And that wasn't counting our other parts and other tire suppliers. That was just BF Goodrich. And I remember one time on one of those incentive trips, they gave us what they called spring dating and bonus points for buying tires. We got that dining room set and that grandfather clock and that china cabinet with our bonus points for buying tires. Along with other prizes they gave us, but we bought a lot of tires. And we went on a lot of trips. We went to Europe several times. We went to Alaska. We went to Hawaii. We went to different places, New Orleans. We went different places around the United States. They wined and dined us for our business. And it was kind of neat, and I enjoyed those trips. One year, I had a trip that I got from KFDI Radio, I think it was, and it was a trip to Spain. And I couldn't go because right after I'd qualified for that trip, Warren hurt himself real bad, and he was one of my key people. And it took about 3 or 4 of us key people to keep that business going. And Warren hurt his knee. A tire blew up and busted the belt and hit him in the knee, and he had to have knee surgery. And he couldn't work. He didn't have a doctor's release, so I could go on that trip. And I didn't see how I could really go on that trip and have enough help at home to take care of the business. So I could transfer that trip. I had enough time to transfer that trip to Mom and Dad. But they were so good to us. I gave Mom and Dad that trip to Spain. And they went to Spain on us. It was a KFDI trip. I got them to transfer that trip to Mom and Dad. And I don't remember, I think it was a week or 10 days. But they flew over to Spain, and they toured southern part of Spain, and they went across the Straits of Gibraltar to Monaco, Africa, right? And they went toured a little bit of northern Africa right there, south of the Straits of Gibraltar, and they sent back some pictures for us to look at. I've got them around here somewhere, but I was very happy that I could give that trip to my folks. But we weren't able to go on it, but I wanted them to go in place of us. And I think they enjoyed it. And then Mom and Dad was getting sick in late '97 with that prostate cancer, and it was getting a little bit worse for him, getting a little harder for him. But Charla had something going on in Chicago, and she flew up there for a meeting, and I asked Mom and Dad if they could fly into Detroit, and I would fly up to Chicago when Charla was done in Chicago, and I'd rent a car, and we were going to drive over to Detroit and pick Mom and Dad up at the airport and go to the Ford Museum in Dearborn, because I kept telling Dad how neat that was. I had been there and he hadn't been, and that Ford Museum in Dearborn is the best and most interesting museum I've ever been in my life. It's really good. And Dad wanted to see that, and he wasn't feeling very good. It was in late '97. He died in May of '98. He wasn't feeling very good. I rented a car in Chicago after I landed there, and I went to the hotel where Charla had attended a convention, and I picked her up. And then we hit the highway and drove, I think it was about a 4-hour trip, give or take, I don't remember, to Detroit, to the airport. And I knew where it was, I had a map, and I think I had been there before. And we drove up to the terminal, and I parked in a parking garage across the street from the terminal. I knew right where Mom and Dad were going, and they were walking out of the terminal, and we were a little bit late, because when I planned this trip, I didn't realize that Detroit was an hour behind Chicago. I didn't even think about that. I thought I was early. But I got to Detroit and I was really about 10 minutes late, and I think they were almost in panic mode because Dad wasn't feeling real strong. He was a little bit weak with that cancer, but he was strong enough he thought he wanted to go to that museum. But when they saw us, I could see relief on their faces. But before they saw us, I could see a little panic there. I'm just glad I wasn't any later than I was. And we went and got a motel in Dearborn, not too far from where the museum was, and I knew my way around because we had been there before. And Dad rested a little while, and then we went to the Ford Museum and bought a 2 or 3 day pass. I don't remember how long it was. But we went over to the museum, and we were there for 2.5 hours, and Charlotte's a lot more aware of what's going on some things than I am. But she said, Alan, we better take Dad back and lay him rest. He looks like he's really getting tired. I'm so glad she was there because I don't notice things like she does. So we took Dad back to the motel and he rested for 2 or 3 hours, and then we got up and went and got something to eat and went back to the museum again. We did it like that in shifts so it wouldn't wear him down so fast. But he had a really good time. And you know, Dearborn's on the eastern side of Detroit. And Dearborn, where we stayed, was right on Michigan Avenue. And I had been there before, and you can take Michigan Avenue right through Dearborn, right into Detroit, right through Detroit, right to the tunnel and the bridge that take you over into Windsor, Canada. It's straight east from Dearborn. And we were driving down Michigan Avenue. Dad was in the front seat, Mom and Charlie were in the back seat of the rental car. It was a Ford Sable, or Mercury Sable, kind of like a Ford Taurus, only it was a Mercury Sable, but it was a new car. It was probably a 96 or 7 model car, you know. And it was a good car. It was a little white 4-door, and about like a Taurus, you know what they are. We're driving down Michigan Avenue, and of course Mom's got this swap meet, garage sale, blood in her veins, real bad. And we're driving through the ghetto. I mean, you know it's a ghetto. And Mom sees these sidewalk sales, and there's, man, it's a pretty rough looking part of town. Mom says, pull over here. Dad says, you better not dare. He starts straightening Mom out. So, you know, I didn't have a choice. I had to keep driving. We drove on over to the Windsor, Canada. I think we went through the tunnel and went over, and at that time you didn't need a passport to go into Canada. But since 9/11, you know, now you need a passport. But we went on over and drove around in Windsor a little bit and saw a little bit, and Dad was getting a little tired, so we drove through the tunnel, I think, going, and then we come back over the bridge coming back. And we drove down Michigan Avenue again, got our eyes full of the ghetto, and went back to motel. But you know, I've been hearing on the radio lately that Detroit has lost about half of its population due to this economy, and they're bulldozing neighborhoods because it's getting so bad. And they don't have enough police and fire people to really take care of the city right, so they're bulldozing neighborhoods. Of course, I'm sure that's the ghetto, you know. But does that answer your question?
Mm-hmm. Is there some place you'd like to travel that you haven't been to yet?
Well, you know, Charlie and I have been quite a few places in Europe, Hawaii, Alaska, United States, Caribbean. You know, if it wasn't for the terrorism now, I would really like to go to the Holy Land, but you know, I don't think I'll go. I just don't think it's worth it. And I always wanted to take a Mediterranean cruise. And I'd kind of like to go to Egypt and Athens, Greece, and we've been to Italy and Rome. And I would really like to go to Egypt and Athens, Greece. But you know, with the circumstances like they are now, I think I'll stay home in the United States. There's a lot to see here, and I'd like to do a little more traveling just here in the States. I don't have a desire to go out of the country anymore.
Is there anything you'd like to add that we haven't talked about?
We covered an awful lot. I think the good Lord's been awful good to me and my family. I'm really blessed to have a lot of good friends and family members. I am very concerned about my sister Diane. They split her open right here and took a mass out of her chest a week or two ago, and this thing had fingers and grew through that sac around your heart, and they had to remove that sac, and they had to remove part of her lung, and then they said it's cancer, and I guess she's got a spot on her thyroid and a spot on her liver, and she's in a lot of pain, and I've talked to her, and I'm really concerned about her. And you know, Doug seems to be having a little trouble. He's walking with a cane. He's all stoved up, got back trouble and knee trouble, and I don't know. I'm worried about both of them, and they're younger than I am. I told them they're supposed to outlive me. Beverly's got problems with diabetes, and her blood sugar levels are up and down and all over the map, and I'm worried about her. I'm in pretty good shape compared to some of my younger siblings, but keep them in your prayers. That's about all I got.
Well, I want to thank you for your time for this interview.
I hope I didn't ramble too much.
No, there's some good details in the stories, and
most of what I said is pretty accurate in my books.
Yeah.
Somebody might find some fault with some of that, but in my mind, that's pretty accurate.
Well, you're telling your memory of it, and so as far as that goes, it's accurate then.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.